we're getting a picture on the TV. We had a good picture, huh? There's a great deal of contrast in it, and currently it's upside down on our monitor, but we can make out a fair amount of detail. Okay, we can verify the position there. The opening I have on the camera.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and some relatives in the audience, I see. I was born and raised here, as you've heard, and ever since I was, probably about 4 years old, I've had an interest in comics. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I began to draw. I mean, I just loved to draw, and it was nothing more than stick figures back then, but it's something that I had an affinity for, and I just really loved doing it. And one of the people that actually kind of inspired me a little bit to continue drawing was actually a cousin of mine who's in the audience right over here, is Hugh Solo. He was an exceptional artist that I looked at, and I always wanted to get a little better just because I could see what was possible. And so I just kept working at comic books because that was something that I really loved. I loved the storytelling, and it seemed to me like the best of both worlds because I loved to read, and I liked watching movies. And some of the things that you could never get out of a film, you would be able to get in a comic book, and some of the things you could never get out of a book that you can get out of a film. It would seem to gel what was the best of both worlds to me. And when I was about 4 years old, I just loved looking at the brightly colored, comic book pages, but I couldn't read them. And unfortunately, at the time, I came over from Seoul, Korea. My mother was originally from Seoul, and she came here and she learned English and very rapidly. I mean, it was amazing how quickly she picked it up. But at the time, she couldn't read English, and I couldn't read it myself since I was 4. And comic books actually kind of gave me the impetus to really want to read. I wanted to learn what was going on in those pages beyond what I could figure out with my eyes. And so it kept me going. And I don't know, ever since I realized that you could actually make a living drawing comic books or writing comic books, I realized that's what I wanted to do. And for some reason, it never really left me. Where other people would normally give up their dream and, go after, settle in with whatever job that you had. And I had a comfortable job. I just couldn't give that up. And that part of me just wouldn't die, I guess. And I just kept working at it. And even when I was a teenager, all the way through high school into college, the professors used to joke around to me about the way because I graduated Illinois Wesleyan with a painting emphasis, because painting and fine arts is what was what they're looking for in an art class. And I took illustration and stuff there, and when it came from my graduate thesis and we had to do our own shows for our senior exhibits, one of the things that the professors noticed is that when you looked at my paintings that I was doing, if you put them together, they're actually told a story. So, and it was basically I was painting panels for a comic book at the time, I guess. I mean, there was no superheroes involved or anything like that, but it was personal issues that I was going through, and I would paint them, and they told the story of some of the things that I felt at the time. And storytelling has always been a major focus of mine. It wasn't just comics. I was reading many books. I mean, I would read all the time. I'd spend all the time in the library too. So if I wasn't drawing, I was reading. But comic books themselves have had a certain stigma about them for most throughout the United States. And it's funny, they're more accepted over in Europe, I guess, than they are here. And the funny thing is that they originated here, but they have a little bit more respect over in Europe. And people look upon them as a viable form of entertainment, where here a lot of times it's been considered more of a kiddie book, something that the children should be reading, and that's about it. But in actuality, it's not that way. It's interesting now that Hollywood is really starting to take a look at what's going on in comics, and they're adapting a lot of the comics that I've known ever since I was a child into films. I mean, films that you don't even realize that are comic books. I know, like, V for Vendetta was a very popular movie that just came out this past year, and that was a comic book in the early 90s, late 80s. There were other things like I'm trying to think of Road to Perdition, which some of that was actually filmed here in Moments area, the Tom Hanks movie. That was a comic book. And it's interesting, though, that there are now the people in Hollywood, the people in actually entertainment magazines and everyone are starting to take notice that comics are a major viable source of entertainment, that they are really starting to consider them worth a good look at. When it comes down to comic books, originally originated from newspaper strips back in the early 1920s, around the turn of the century. And what they did was they collected the newspaper strips and into a comic book format and resold them again to the children, and then they noticed that they were making some pretty good money off of that, so they decided to adapt and create their own stories strictly for the comic books. And that's where Superman and The Shadow and I'm trying to think of the other ones, Doc Savage and a lot of the westerns and some of the crime comic books, the Elliot Nesses they were making into a comic book at the time. And they started telling those stories through that then. And the kids just ate it up and they loved it. And it was as wide and varied story-wise. During that time, comic books were as wide and varied as there were movies now. They had the gangster comic books, they had the superheroes, they had the horror, the science fiction, the love stories, everything. And somewhere along in the 1950s, that changed because there was basically a government push that comic books were contributing to juvenile delinquency. And the comic book industry itself became scared because they were being called into hearings, having to defend themselves for stories that they were making. And due to that, the comic industry decided to censor themselves, and they created the Comics Code, which unfortunately wiped out most of the other storytelling that was available. It wiped out the crime comic books. It wiped out a lot of the love stories, the horror comics, and basically all that was left was superheroes and some westerns, but not very much more than that. And some people have said that the way they had made it was due to the fact of the most successful companies ganging up on the ones that were actually outdoing them, or basically was their competition, and they created the Comics Code specifically to drive those people out of business. And there's some truth to that. But anyway, what was left was superheroes, some Western stories, some science fiction stories, and thus it's become known as the superhero genre now ever since. And it's thrived over time. I mean, obviously the superheroes are doing fairly well. Now they are starting to get noticed, and films are being made about Spider-Man and Superman and Batman and all of that. And it's gaining its popularity through that. But at the same time, what people haven't realized too is that the comic code has since begun to disappear as well. The comic shops have opened up, and you can no longer really find comics. Unfortunately, you can't find them at the Osco Drugs or the Walgreens or anything like you used to when I was a kid. I mean, that's where I was introduced to comics, was at the local drugstore and the little spinner rack that they had there, And I mean, I remember going there when I was 5 or 6 years old and picking out my favorites and being able to choose somebody's phone. But and being able to choose what I was looking for, and I had no idea of comics at the time. Unfortunately, that has also kind of segregated the market of comics. There aren't any new readers coming in, or not enough. And the comic, unless you're looking specifically for comic books, the only place you can really find them now, unfortunately, is a comic shop. It's recently started where they're being reintroduced back into Barnes & Noble and Borders and such, and you might be able to find some of them there. But for the most part, the majority of comics can be found at a comic shop. Like, Lori is back there helping me out here selling books here at Amazing Fantasy up in Frankfurt is where they have it. It's a fantastic comic store. I mean, it's probably one of the best I've ever been to. But unfortunately, yes, the comic field has kind of shrunk a little bit. But the quality has grown. The books that were missing back in the 60s due to the Comics Code, the westerns, the murder mystery stories, the love stories and all that, they've slowly come back. Whatever you're looking for, if you have an interest in comics or in a particular genre of story, they do have a comic book out there for it. Some of them are very, very good. Bone was one, for instance, that was mentioned earlier. Bone, when I first started reading Bone, it started out as just a really like a lovable little cartoon that eventually advanced into something along the lines of Lord of the Rings. It was a very good, very well done story for kids. It's all ages, and it's been nationally recognized, and many awards have been given out for that book. And there are so many other books out there that are the same. Like I said, a lot of them have been made into film. Most of the comics were done, and the stuff that I really started reading was in the 1970s. But in the 1980s, there was I guess what you'd call a renaissance in comics. And they had some tremendous writers and artists coming out that decided to shake up the system and tell the stories that they wanted to tell. And that's what got me, or kept me in comics, were these men. Alan Moore and Frank Miller, they came in and they started telling these, I guess for lack of a better term, more intelligent, more adult stories. And they were doing it in the superhero genre, but they were treating it as what it's like for superheroes in the real world, if there was such a thing, and all the real problems that they would have to encounter and endure. And they were done so well that they were. I mean, I know Neil Gaiman had come in and he had won this. I can't remember what award it was though, but I think it was a. Do you know what it was, Lori? What was it? He had won the World Fantasy Award for Best Short Story that year, I believe, in science fiction. And because comics had such a stigma about it, they banned comics the following year. But it was done so well that that people started taking notice then. And men like Neil Gaiman, Alan Moore, and Frank Miller, and oh God, I can't even think of all the different writers and artists that are out there now that are advancing the quality of books out there. I mean, they're as varied as they are when it comes to novels and film, and a lot of the filmmakers and novelists are actually writing comic books now because that's what they grew up loving. I know Brad Meltzer, who is he's a New York Times bestseller with a book right now called The Book of Fate that has just come out, and he is also writing Justice League for DC, and the one that I work with is Paul Dini, and he is the writer for Lost, the TV show. If you ever get a chance to watch that, he also writes comic books on the side, and one of them that he writes happens to be the one I'm working on right now. Kevin Smith, he of course a lot of you might know his movies and such, but he is such a big fan of comics that he has taken the time to write comics for a while. I think he stepped away from it because he realized he just doesn't have the time commitment anymore. But there are just so many, people that are coming from other fields that I found it kind of interesting that I was out in San Diego actually getting to meet some of these people, some filmmakers, some of the Hollywood writers, and there are Hollywood writers that are coming up to me asking me if I can somehow get them into comics. And I'm sorry, I mean, if you can't do it with your credentials, I don't know what I can do here, you know. But I mean, some of the writers that, I mean, I knew their work, you know, and they're coming up to me, you know, trying to find a way to collaborate in order to make a comic book, you know, because these guys loved the medium so much. This is what drove them to do what they did. And I mean, eventually following film, following going into writing novels and such. Neil Gaiman is one that has gone on to write many novels too as well, and Alan Moore, who's written so many different things. And I guess I can think of I mentioned V for Vendetta, which is one of them that I absolutely loved in the late 80s, early 90s. And he also wrote a book From Hell, which was butchered for a movie. Unfortunately, it was a terrible movie, but it was a fantastic book. But as you can tell, I mean, some of the ones that I'm mentioning, they're not superhero comics. From Hell was a very in-depth study on Jack the Ripper and what went on during that time and what he believed transpired, and it really went in depth and just a fascinating book. But I know some of you are going to ask me or wanting to know how I got into comics and how did I get my job. And it started out, how I had said that, this thing keeps on lowering on me here. There we go. But it started out, obviously, that I knew that's kind of what I've always wanted to do. And when I had graduated college, this is dating me, but the internet really hadn't kicked on yet, hadn't really started, and there wasn't anybody to really tell me how to go about, you know, getting into the business aside from moving straight to New York. And I went up to a comic convention for the first time, and I walked around. I came in more as a fan. Fortunately for me, one of the largest ones in the nation is right up here at the Chicago Comic-Con in July. And basically one summer I decided to go up there and spend a day up there. And I walked around, and I was kind of on a little mission to figure out how do I get into this. And as I was walking around, I noticed other people that had their portfolios out that were showing their artwork. And I put two and two together really quickly and figured out that this is where you get your foot in the door. And you bring your samples in and have your editors look at it and promptly get rejected. But at least they get to know and see and get to know your face. And the next year I put together my first portfolio. And hang on here. If I can show it. There it is. There's my first sample pages that I ever took to a convention. And I mean, some of them, I mean, I'm not quite as proud of them as I was when I first did them, but at least it showed the editors, and I got to meet a few people, and they gave me some pointers. And I knew I wasn't good enough then as an artist. I felt that I needed a little ways to go, but I was also looking for someone who would actually give me a job, something. I mean, it didn't have to be for a big company, but in comics, there are a lot of independent writers and independent artists that are making their own comics. And they had artist alley tables that were set up, and they were trying to promote their own comics. And that year, I met a couple of those guys who were basically, they were looking for an artist who was willing to work for cheap or nothing, actually, for me. And I was looking for work. And the work would keep me going, keep me learning, keep me drawing. And I needed that in order to keep going, you know, a story to tell. And so I put together a portfolio, and I met a few people, and we put out a few comics together, and unfortunately I can't show those because I don't have any scans of those images anymore. But we had worked on a few stories, and I took it to a few other people, a few other independent companies that were actually willing to hire me for a little more money, and they gave me deadlines, and that it started to. Basically, I started to learn the job business aspect of it. And some of the things when it comes to art, and the job, and when it comes to writers as well, you have a certain amount of time period in order to create your story and create your work. And unfortunately, as an artist, you always wish to go back and rework your art and make it better. And unfortunately, you can't do that in a business. You have deadlines to make, you have to produce the work, and you have to keep moving forward. And so working with a few small independent companies that actually gave me deadlines, I got to learn pretty quick how to cut corners, what I had to do in order to continue this as a job. And then I moved on. I got a little bit tired of that. I moved back on to collaborating with a few friends, and I was trying to make headway to work for Marvel or DC or one of the bigger companies. And we had come together with a story that I made a few sample pages of, which involved a mafia character is what the story was. And you can see some of the pages right here. And fortunately for me, I took these pages to the Chicago convention again. And I met up with some friends that I had made from the previous year who were actually starting work with Marvel. And as I was showing pages around, I brought it up to them at the Marvel booth. And it was Chris Golden and Tom Snagowski and John Cassaday, which I don't know if you're a comic fan, you know these names, but especially John Cassaday, who's currently the artist on X-Men, and working with Joss Whedon, who is the creator of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and all of that. And John Cassaday was looking over the shoulder, and Chris and Tom were looking at it. And John took me aside afterwards and expressed his interest about how much he liked what I was doing, because it reminded him a lot of the work that he was trying to do as well. And he took me aside and introduced me to his editors. And that was my first real it was my first real into the comic industry. I mean, all these years I have been taking it directly to editors, and I quickly discovered that, you know, you got to know a few people, you know, and just like any job in the world, you know, you get hired by a friend, you know, you get recommended by a friend. And John took me around and recommended me, and I didn't get hired that year, but my name got passed around, and I found out later that I was considered for, you know, many different projects over the line, but he had taken me aside. And after I had talked with John, Tom Snagowski had come up to me, and he wanted to work on a story together. And he had begun developing it, and this is another shot of some of those sample pages that I had taken. And actually, when I was, some of these pages that you can see, I was actually working on basically some aspects of my art. I was working on a lot of light and shadow and different things that I was learning to add to the art to make it more realistic, to make it better looking. And fortunately for me, it took some people took interest in it. But Tom Snagowski came to me with this character, and we started working on that together. And it's kind of a little baby project of mine, involving a man that works for a secret version of the CIA, dealing with basically dealing with monsters and occult, you know, demons and monsters and things like that. And we created this character together, and I began working on it, and I created these really intricate pages. And I poured everything into these pages, basically, you know, challenging editors to, you know, ignore me this time, you know, as far as trying to get work. And because every year I would go there and they would criticize one little thing or another, and I basically created these pages not wanting them to find anything wrong with them. You know, I wanted them to basically to not be able to find anything at all, you know, because at the conventions they would do everything they could to, you know, kick you back into line essentially, and not give you the job. And I took these pages around and showed them to the editors the next year, and they did take a real interest in me this time. And I started getting calls from a few different publishers as I had created these pages. and they had talked to me about working on a number of different books. But in the meantime, I worked for a trucking company here, and this was my night work. This is what I did in my free time, and I had a wife and 2 kids, and I didn't want to give that up. I mean, as far as like giving up a secure job, and I was looking for the right opportunity at the time. Though I had grown comfortable in my job, and I was working. I mean, well, as we had mentioned before about health insurance and all of that, it's some things that you have to consider. And but I was getting called from Marvel and DC about doing work, and I took a part-time job in the meantime doing this character called Kilroy for Caliber Comics. And they allowed me a fairly open deadline, so that's the reason I had taken it. And it allowed me to continue drawing, making a little bit of money, and in the meantime, kind of biding my time, hoping for the right opportunity to arise where I could actually make the jump to do work full time. And these are some of the things that I was asked to do. At DC Comics, they were creating a Sergeant Rock book that eventually Joe Kubert came on and did, which appropriately so, because since he's the man who essentially created Sergeant Rock here. But they had considered me for a little while, and they were creating this mini-series, and they asked me to do some figure sketches for them. And I was asked to do a number of different figure sketches, anything from Spider-Man to Sergeant Rock. I did a Luke Cage sketch that was in a number of different things just to see how I would draw this character or that character, and I would do this in my free time at night, hoping for that opportunity. And in the meantime, I also took time out to do portraits. That was another thing to keep me busy on the side. So I thought I'd bring those along to show you, though. But I would do charcoal portraits for people, and these are my kids, actually, so I did that as a gift. But I also did some for other people as well. And this kept me busy in the meantime as I was basically looking for the right opportunity to work in comics. And the right opportunity came, and they hired me at DC, or at Marvel, excuse me. The editor that I had talked to at DC that asked me to do the Sergeant Rock book, the time just as he was about to hire me for that, he got hired away to Marvel, and he became one of Marvel's main editors. And he had called me up from home one night and basically was telling me, "You're going to hear news tomorrow that I'm leaving DC, but don't worry, I want to take you with me. I want you to work for me." And I was excited about it. And he was looking for the right opportunity for me, and it took a little bit of time. Unfortunately, it took an extra 6 months or so, but he found this story, which I was working with Ron Zimmerman, who is a Hollywood script doctor, and if you've seen the TV show Seventh Heaven, he was an actor on there, and also one of Howard Stern's best friends. And anyway, he had created this Thing story, and they wanted me to do it. And so I began work on the Thing story, but they gave me an open deadline. So I was able to keep my day job, and I could work on the Thing story at night. And it allowed me to basically kind of have the best of both worlds. You know, I was able to continue working on what I loved and still maintain the security of a regular job. And anyway, these are a number of the pages that I had done for the Thing story, and it's a fun little story. It's the main gist of the story was the Thing is recruited by Nick Fury, who is like the Marvel version of the super secret agent, the 007, and he is recruited to go out in the desert to deal with this major threat, and this soldier, this everyday private, is asked to drive him out to this location. And as they sit there waiting for this threat to arrive, the private is just a huge fan of the Thing as a superhero, and they start regaling tales, and it's really a cute, funny story actually, and I really enjoyed it. But along the time that I was finishing up the Thing story, Chris Golden, who was the man that I had met with those previous pages a while ago, he had a line on a Dr. Fate miniseries, and this would actually mean for me to actually give up my job and actually go full time into comics. And he approached me about the Dr. Fate miniseries, and I was a little hesitant at first, because of the health insurance difference and a number of different things like that, which I was a little concerned with. But he basically kind of cajoled me into saying, "Come on, Don, this is what you always wanted to do. It's time to put up or shut up, and let's give it a shot." And so I did, and we went on to do the Dr. Fate miniseries, which, as you can see, that was what was in the paper the other night, and also you can see the Kankakee County Courthouse in the background. I would throw in some local flavor around here whenever I could. I would go out and take pictures around town and of different areas whenever they required something that reminded me of something locally. I would do that, But I did a few of these Dr. Fate pages, and I was just finishing up, or actually I was in the middle of the Dr. Fate issue when they, from what I believe is that my editor saw how consistent I was as far as producing pages on a weekly basis, and they are looking for professionals in the comic industry. Unfortunately, a lot of the people that work in comics, they can sometimes not be quite so professional. They have a tendency to not meet their deadlines on time. And I was working on a book that was, it had deadlines, but it was due down the road, but I was producing at a speed that was consistent with or better than some of the people that were working regularly. And he gave me I think a test book with a fill-in for a Hawkman issue is what I worked on, and I finished that and turned it in. And it wasn't my best work, but I did what I could, and I was pretty happy with it though. And I had finished that off and went on to finish off the Dr. Fate series, and then I became a little concerned because there was nothing for me to do afterwards, and I was starting to call editors and look for my next job, look for my next series or next issue that I could do. And fortunately for me, one of the top books that DC had was JSA, and for some strange reason, I still don't know why, but he offered the job to me, and I became the regular penciler on JSA. And that's where I met Jeff Johns, who I consider a good friend. And he's been the writer, along with David Goyer, on JSA for quite some time. And David Goyer is the one who wrote the Batman Begins movie. And Jeff was also, they all have their Hollywood connections, but Jeff was also the Richard Donner's assistant for many years. And he moved into comics after he was on the set of Conspiracy Theory, is what he was working on with Richard Donner at the time. And he was in New York on the set of Conspiracy Theory when DC came down with him with a couple of the big book of conspiracies they had given out. And they got to talking with Jeff and found out what a big comic fan he was, and they offered him to pitch a series to them, which they promptly accepted the next week, and he began working in comics full time. And anyway, he was working on JSA, and I was just being brought in. And the great thing about working with Jeff, which is different from all the other writers that I've worked with, is that he called up the day I was hired and introduced himself to me, and we talked for a little bit, and he told me about all his plans that he had for the next 2 years on JSA. And then he basically offered the floor to me and said, "Well, what do you think? Do you have any ideas?" And I gave him my ideas, and the difference working with Jeff compared to most writers is most writers really don't want to hear me. They want me to just draw the book and that's it. Just put me in the corner and I'm fine, But and just draw the pictures for everybody. But But with Jeff, he actually wanted to hear what I had to say. And some of the things I had to say he liked and he used. Not everything, but probably about 50, well, I wouldn't even say 50%, but yeah, probably about, 3 or 4 ideas out of every 10 that I'd have, he'd actually use. And that was quite nice. It became more of a collaborative effort. And working with Jeff was a lot of fun. And I was happy to work with him for, I stayed on JSA for a couple years. And just had a really good time on that book, though. And then after that, I moved on to Batman. Is what I moved on to. Well, here's the JSA stuff. I'm sorry, I'm not clicking on it, but these are some of the characters in JSA. And JSA is one of the oldest books that DC has. It was created back in around the same time or shortly after Batman and Superman. And All-Star Comics is what it was called back then. And they basically were used as kind of a test run for superheroes. They would put these characters into this all-star collection, and the ones that were popular enough to get their own series, they would move on to their own series. And they've had characters like the Flash and Green Lantern in there, as much as let's see, everyone else on the other team is Dr. Midnight and Hourman and Mr. Terrific and Stargirl and Starman, and Hawkman was one of them as well. Just a huge team book that it was a challenge to do, and I really enjoyed working with them on that, though. But these are some of the pages that I had done. Actually, that's one of my favorite pages with the Crimson Avenger character that Jeff had created. And but these anyway, I had moved on to Batman, so I'll just move on to here, though. And fortunately for me, my editor, who was then the JSA editor, got moved on to the Batman series. And he asked me to come aboard with Batman. And I moved on to work with James Robinson, who is another writer who I absolutely loved. Just a fantastic writer. I just remember reading his stuff when I was younger. And matter of fact, kind of went... when I first met him or called him on the phone, kind of became a little bit of a fanboy myself, and just professed how much I loved some of his work. He was a writer on Starman and The Golden Age and a number of different books, though. And he's also, he's moved on, and he's another one that's become a Hollywood writer since. But anyway, this was his first venture back into comics after running off to do the Hollywood thing for a little while. And he came back with this Batman book called Face the Face, and it involved Batman meeting basically the struggles of a Two-Face trying to reform himself and eventually failing. But these are some of the pages. And I brought these along to show you guys because I know a number of you might want to know how the process works. What you see on the left-hand side is an actual page of the script that James sent me. And, if you can't read it, it explains, this is what I work from. And this is page 18 from Batman 654. And it explains right here in panel 1 that he wants it to be the big panel on the page, as big as the rest of the panels will allow. He said, in one fluid motion, Batman is lifted White, who is the villain, up by his shirt front. He said, White's feet off the ground. Batman glares up at him in anger, and it tells what Batman says. And then it tells on panel 2, we look down past White in close-up, flailing, choking to Batman also in close-up, but an arm's length further away, and we see the intensity of Batman here. And these are the cues that the writer gives me on what he wants to see drawn. In the comic book process, I kind of equate it to film and movies. James is the writer and essentially kind of a director, and I'm also the director and I guess you'd say cinematographer, making sure that what I want to see and what he wants to see is done to the best of our ability. And if you can see the rest of it, though, it tells, like panel 3, it explains a long shot of Batman as a long shot of Batman and White as Batman casually tosses or throws White down onto the floor, and you see how I dealt with that, though. And then it just moves on from there and explains a tight close-up of Batman looking down out of panel towards white in panel 5. Or hang on here, I'm sorry. Panel 4 is white lie sprawled on the floor, which you can see there. And panel 5 is a tight close-up, which I moved into really close to where you're just looking at Batman's eye here. And then in the end it says Batman in close-up walking toward us away from white. And I chose to actually leave the focus on white and just show the shadow of Batman's feet as he's walking away, though. But for the most part, I try to keep up with that and follow what the writer wants. But sometimes I will take my own idea of what I think would be best seen and move things around a little bit, though. But I'd say 90% of the time I follow what he has to say and what he's asking to be seen. But a few times, if there's any discrepancy, I will email him or call them and ask him, I have this idea in mind. What do you think? And usually they're usually pretty cool with what I want, So I usually don't have any problem with that. But after I finish penciling the pages, because these right here are the penciled pages, I will FedEx them off to the inker, who will lay the ink down and do all the work that I've asked of him. And that's what the inked pages look like. And in the end, we move on to color, and that's what it looks like. They send it off to a colorist, and the colorist will put in all the color, and they will also send it off then to the letterer, who will letter everything. And here you can see the finished page right here and what it looked like in the end. But that's essentially the process of what it takes for a comic book to be done. And this right here is a picture. I'm showing you some of the little cheats as an artist that I'm able to do right here. This is the penciled page, and if you'll notice, panel 2 is blank, but in the background. Oh, geez, we must have had a different page here. There's what it is. After I sent it to the inker with the photo that I wanted, that I had taken, to be dropped into the background, which makes so much easier work for me. But every once in a while, I will do this, and when it works out really nice, a lot of stuff with Photoshop has really made our lives as artists easier. We're able to throw in photo backgrounds, and sometimes what they will call statting in an image, which they will take an image that I had previously drawn and just put it into the next panel, or a few panels away, and so I won't have to draw it again. But just to show you what we can do here, that's where it comes from right here, and that's what the finished product looked like. But how do I back up on this thing? I found it. There we go. So I just threw this in because I was really happy with this. This book comes out next week, actually, next Wednesday. But it's a Joker story. It's the Christmas issue, and it's the Joker who happens to run into Robin and kidnaps him, and basically torturing Robin as he's trying to escape by running over Christmas shoppers. So, and I mean that's the Joker for you, though. But that's a little panel that I had in there, which I wanted to show. And here's a couple pages from the issue that comes out in January. But and here I wanted to show you these, though, because what will happen when I work for DC is they will ask me when I'm starting a new project, they would ask me to draw some sketches of how I would draw a character and what they would see, or how I would envision the character. And they wanted to put me on this Detective Comics, which was their flagship title earlier this year. And the first issue was was a Riddler issue. And they asked me to draw the Riddler and redesign his costume a little bit. Not much, but just a little. And here was the design that I gave them. And I would call them up and ask them, how to do things. Or like they wanted the question marks all over the costume, or all over his sport coat jacket. And I didn't like the idea of these big question marks, so I decided to try to make it into like a pattern to make it look a little more interesting and a little less well, goofy and all in essence, though. But anyway, I had finished off this, and I had it was approved, and we went on to do the story. And this one is coming out. Actually, I probably shouldn't be showing everyone this, though, but this next one is coming out in January, and they asked me to redesign the new ventriloquist character. And I was quite happy to do that, though. But this one is far more interesting to me than the original ventriloquist. So, but just as a character, it makes for the comic fans out there, you might know the character. But this is the one that I'm looking forward to seeing how people react to it. But and now I am working on actually February's issue now, which is unfortunately been a bit of a tight deadline here, but because of we're all a little bit far behind with Paul and myself and everything, though. But I'd like to open up the floor to some questions here, and I'd be more than happy to answer anything. I'm sorry. Yes? A Wacom tablet is what most artists use nowadays with the Photoshop. There are a few other programs out there, some painter programs that other artists use, but Photoshop is really prevalent. I know of a couple artists that work exclusively in Photoshop, and there is no original art. It's all done on the Wacom tablet, and it's all done into the screen. And he does all of his work there, and there is no original art to be seen. But for me, I usually don't have much to do with it. I'm still in a traditional sense. I do a lot of the paper pencil, and I'm kind of relegated to simply just scanning and sending off work right now. But the medium is heading in that direction. And the more and more people are using the Photoshop and painter programs, and the artwork is becoming more and more intricate all the time because of that, because it allows the artist to do other things that before they didn't have the time to do. And now with the deadlines involved, this takes away some of the grunt work, and they're able to move on to other things to basically make the artwork much better. You know, I'm very impressed with some of the things that some of the artists can do. Anyone else? Wow, I think I covered everything. Yes? How long would it take me to finish a regular comic book? Usually it takes roughly a day to do a page. Not quite for me. Sometimes it's a little bit less, or sometimes a little bit more than a day. But on average, it takes about 5 to 5.5 weeks to do an issue. Unfortunately, the comics come out every 4 weeks, and so every once in a while, fill-in artists are needed and things like that. Yes. Do what? What'd you say? Oh, on shadowing? Yeah, tips on shadowing. What I would say, and this is what I did, was get a light. Get a nice big light, a spotlight, and look at yourself in the mirror or have a friend pose. And look at how the shadows fall on the face, and you'll notice how the shadow of your nose comes down across this way. When the light is coming from over here, you'll see the light of the shadow of the nose coming this way, and just look at real life, and use lights to manipulate that so you can see how to shadow things. It just takes a little practice. What I was doing actually to improve my art is I would take photos. I would have friends come in, and I would arrange the lights the way I wanted them, and I would take photos of them, and I would look at them when I was drawing, and it made the world of difference because you could see all the little nuances of shadow that you normally wouldn't pick up when you're just trying to draw from your head. It doesn't work that way a lot of times. Yes? Oh, yeah. Asking about work. This man up here, if you couldn't hear, was asking about my beginnings of working for free and eventually progressing up to actually making a living and an income. When you're first starting out this job or this profession, and when it comes to any entertainment medium, I guess, when it comes to novels, when it comes to music, when it comes to art, you have to love to do it. You can't just do this because you're hoping to make money at it, because at the very start, you're putting in a lot of work for no money, and you really have to enjoy doing it. I mean, it's something that has to be inside you, that you can't, you have to want to do it, whether you're making any money at it or not. And yeah, I started out with doing these things for little to no money, and happy to do it just so I could get the experience, just because I loved doing it on a regular basis. And as I got better, as the artwork got better, the pay began to come. The pay began to increase, and the people with more money wanted to hire me, essentially. And it takes time. That's why it's, for people that getting into this type of business, you really, really have to love it. And I mean, more than anything else, you have to do it not for the money. And if you really believe in it and you get good enough at it, the money will come. You know, I make a decent living. You know, I do all right. I know some people in the industry that make a very good living, and I know some that make a little less. You know, but I know for a fact that everybody involved in the industry, they're doing it more out of love than they are just for the money. You know, the money's nice, but just the fact of, you know, creating your own stories and you know, basically working on your own art, and the fact that I can work from home and I can be there with my kids, you know, any hour of the day. Those are the things that matter to me. And there are other jobs that I could actually work at as an artist and probably make more money than I do here. But this is something that I like to do, and I'm happy to remain where I'm at, working at what I do. So, yes. Correct. Oh, okay. Okay. This man up here asked me that if I, you know, once I pencil the pages and I send it to an inker, what does the inker do? Well, what I pencil and lay down on the page, I will also lay some direction down as to what I would ask of him to do. And a lot of what he does, he works with brush, nib, pen, and creates different nuances in the line to make the artwork stand out a little bit more. And he will also use different techniques in order to bring life to the page a little bit, though. He will come in with using gray tones and shadowing and different things. Yes, correct. It depends on which artist. I mean, there's some artists out there that do the whole shebang and do it all, you know, and more power to them. It's impressive some of the things that they're capable of. But there are some very good inkers out there that just specialize in that, and they have that little extra touch to the line that I don't have, you know. I'm working at it, but but I don't have it quite yet. Yes? To remake a character? Oh, how long does it take for me to remake a character? Well, a lot of this stuff is expressed to me or asked of me to do. They already knew what the character, I mean, like I already knew what the Riddler was, you know, who the Riddler was. And they came to me asking, you know, stating that he should be seen in sunglasses now as opposed to a mask. And some of it was up to me as far as how to make him look, but a lot of the stuff the direction was already given to me. And they were asking of me to make some design pages, and actually that was not the only one that I had done. There was another one that I had done too, and this was the one that was chosen. You know, a couple minor changes here and there, and ultimately the editors are the ones that are in charge of the finished product and what can be seen. I mean, there are some things that I would rather do that the editors do not allow. You know, like for instance, like in the comic books, you can never see Batman's eyes. He has the little white mask that you can't see his eyes. I'd prefer to put his eyes in, but for some reason, editing does not allow that. They will keep his eyes blank and white and everything, though. But that's just taste, you know, my personal taste compared to what the editors demand, because they're the ones that are in charge of the license of Batman, you know, in order to make him into films and put him on lunch boxes or whatever else, you know. Anyone else? Yes. Oh God, my favorite character? I don't really have a favorite character, you know. There's so many that I liked, but as a kid growing up, I read the Hulk quite often. I loved the Hulk as a character, and Spider-Man and Batman. Frank Miller really got me on Batman when I was younger, and so Batman's a favorite of mine. I also like Green Lantern and the Fantastic Four, and pretty much you name it. When I was younger, I was a bit of a comic book junkie, so I loved it all. Yes.
What's your favorite comic, DC or Marvel?
Oh, DC or Marvel? Well, that's hard to say. When I was a kid, I grew up, I read Marvel comics more. But I've been working for DC, and DC just treats their people so well that I'm happy working with DC. And some of the people that I've gotten to know and some of the characters that I've gotten to know actually at DC, I've really grown to like DC quite a bit now. But I like the Marvel characters too. That's really hard to say which one's my favorite, because I have favorites in both. But as a kid, I'd probably say definitely Marvel, you know. Yes? Oh, God. Who do I think has the best powers? As opposed to what I would like to have as I don't know. I don't know. They're all very interesting, you know. I mean, Superman was by far the first and the best of them all, you know. I mean, as far as that goes, but I do like the Marvel characters that are a bit more fallible and a bit more human, you know. So I enjoy them both. But the best powers, I don't know. That'd be tough to say. Yes.
Did you ever see yourself drawing cartoons for shows or on TV?
Oh, drawing cartoons for like animation or cartoons and stuff like that? It's a possibility, but I couldn't live here. There's no avenues up for it around here. I know like Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network is a possibility. I mean, there are a lot of inroads. I know a lot of people at Cartoon Network of all things, you know, but I would have to move away from here, and I don't want to do that right now. But as a possibility down the road, maybe, you know. It'll take time, you know. Yes. Of all the comics I've worked on, which was my favorite? Story-wise or art-wise? Art-wise, I did a book, JSA issue 72 is what I did, that I was really proud of, you know, artistically what I did. That's probably my favorite. Story-wise, there was a JSA story. It was a 2-part story about Our Man that I really, really liked. And it was a story about a father and a son and all the dealings with between the two. And it was a bit personal to me because some of the issues, I guess, that I had growing up were the same. And it was about the son going through a very dangerous and nasty operation and his father at his side. And they were discussing all the problems that they had together between the two of them over life and what would happen. And in the end, one of them was going to die because one of them had to give up his life for the other one. And that was a great story that I liked working on. That was very personal to me. But art-wise, issue 72 of JSA, that was my favorite so far.
I don't want to cut all the questions short, but I want to tell a couple things here.
Go ahead.
There are comic books on the back page, the back table for sale, and I bet Don would autograph
Batman for you, and I bet he would answer more questions too, and the tape is running out. But we don't want to stop anybody from talking. What we do want to do is thank all of you for coming, and Don, we're proud of you. We're proud of you.
Thank you.